I'm doing my Friday show a little bit earlier today for a couple reasons. Partly because I woke up really early today, and also because I'm going to see if I can try and trip up the algos a little bit. See if maybe this one will reach out and maybe make it to a few more people than normal. But I titled this one Patterns because often when you hear the word patterns, you think of either different tasks or behaviors or events or occurring things as they happen in an order. Um, I titled it that because there's a lot of patterns going on in a lot of different topics and subject matter, and some of the patterns are you see it in the different propaganda you see different patterns in the narratives you see, which goes with the propaganda. You see patterns of behavior of what our foreign enemies do versus what we've done, and there's been a shakeup in some of the patterns as of lately. Now, you know, from what I've heard of this change of stance on the policy having to do with our use of WMDs, even considering possible use against conventional threats, that is a form of posturing because right now the regime has to be feeling very backed into a corner, because if you've watched my most recent and past lives, then you understand what I'm talking about. Because I said before that the only thing that's going to happen in this situation is that their proxy will lose. I mean, that's a guarantee. That's set in stone. Their proxy is going to lose. And the only thing that they can hope to do is to prolong it as long as possible and make some sort of attempt, and I'm talking about those that are unhinged enough, because there's still quite a lot of people that are unhinged in positions of that they ought not be in, but these people have positions of influence and power where they can make very bad choices that affect the rest of the world and the people living in it. And we're seeing a shift in patterns because of the situation as it's developing is not looking favorable for the West. Now, I've seen all kinds of kooky, crazy narratives, and again, I couldn't give a rat's ass about Russia. And I mean that. I really couldn't. But we all just want the truth, and we have to be honest. The West has pumped out these ludicrous, just off the wall, just nutty narratives about what's actually really happening there. And they use bits and pieces of just the wildest footage to be able to craft such narratives. And what's really actually happened is that Russia's not doing a general mobilization. They've only called up their reserves, as I've said very long ago. I've said that many lives ago. These 300,000 troops that they pulled out of the civilian world were their reserves, much like how we have reserves. And in times of war, they get called forward and put it back into circulation. So these 300 reserves that were pulled out and put back into service by the Russians were for their invasion that's coming up for Ukraine. Now, there had been a long, some 5-hour speech given in Valdai, a place called Valdai, where the Russian leader gave his speech and answered a bunch of questions that people had. And there's some very important things to be understood from this Valdai speech. And you don't hear about it from many sources, which is why I follow that Duran channel, because they literally comb everything that happens in Europe between high-ranking diplomats and leaders and even the military personnel of European nations. They actually have a very firm ear to the ground of everything that's going on in Europe, far better than most other people do, which is why when it comes to at least current events as it relates to specifically Europe, I will actually listen to that channel. Though I don't agree, I endorse them insofar as their ability to know exactly what's been said and what's been happening as far as current events goes. I endorse them in that regard, but that doesn't mean that I agree with every last little thing they say. There are certain things that I disagree with because I've managed to unearth through all my delicate research, my intricate, delicate research I do, because I do my due diligence, and those of you who have been with me for this long all know that. I've done a lot of due diligence. I've done my research, and I've done it well. And there are some things that are said that I don't completely agree with, but when it comes to the raw events, the raw happenings, and the way they break it down, they really, really have a excellent grasp of what actually is said between these different high-ranking dignitaries in Europe and what is actually being done in Europe, especially inside of that proxy nation, the Western proxy nation. So, as it relates to this 5-hour-long speech, one of the most important things to be taken away from that speech is that he finally had something to say about the whole situation there. And it tells a lot. So what he actually had said was that, the Russians have everything under control inside of their little conflict there, their limited incursion, and they're going to be expanding it. But he said, now this is the part, like I've been saying in my recent lives, I've said, the only way anybody would know the actual specific battle plans would be if you were some sort of insect in the room at the map and briefing rooms, the command centers, where their generals all get together and come up with these things. And he actually said that. He said that, I can't tell anybody about our plans. He says, I'm privy to the plans that are coming, but I can't tell anybody about it. And like the guys on this Duran video said, they mentioned that, one of the reporters had asked a question about Odessa. And this says a whole lot in and of itself. Putin never said that Odessa would be part of an independent Ukraine, which was very important to, glean from that conversation. So, all in all, what's been insinuated is that, yes, the Russians are preparing to do this final massive hammer blow with this massive force that they're gathering together, which will no doubt be partially made up of active troops, but also reserve troops. It'll be some sort of a mix match with that. Because in any time you're doing an invasion, you're not going to just use all reserves or all active. You have to kind of mix and match. The active guys, being the most professional of your forces, are going to give backbone to the reservists. So they're going to mix and match them in ways to where they will have full efficiency from their fighting units on the ground. So they are indeed preparing to bring this thing to an end. And like I said in my past, most recent lives, that yes, they're they're probably going to do it sooner than later. I don't see them really sitting and waiting on this one because of all the talk that's been going on and all these Western narratives about nuke war and all this other stuff. I don't think they're going to give them a chance to pull something like that off. I just don't. I really don't. Again, I could be wrong. They might be waiting a little longer than I anticipated. Last week, I gave it about between 2 to 4 weeks, which is a month, between 2 and 4 weeks. But I also did say that it could be a little longer. But, because it does take time to put together a massive invasion, and they've already been at it since they've been calling up these reservists. They've already been working on putting this thing together. They no doubt have their game plan already set up, their entire battle plan. Now they're just waiting to give the op orders to actually carry it out. They're also building up their logistics. They're building up their forces at their jump-off points. They're moving their forward ammunition dumps forward for the invading prongs and everything else. They're getting ready to put an end to this thing finally. And I think for world peace, honestly, because of how things have been, I think that would be the most responsible thing for them to do is hurry up and just bring this thing to an end, because it would put to bed the possibility of anybody trying to pull off some type of FF event where they would be so brazen and so stupid as to do something like that. Now, I did say, and I still stand by this, I don't see that happening. I do not see that happening. Like I said, these Western elites, yeah, they're really stupid. They are really, really arrogant. And, to a certain extent, yeah, in a way, they are a little suicidal even because of their insistence upon wiping out the population of their own power base, which is just stupid because you're eviscerating your own power base. You're eviscerating your own means by which you can project power anywhere else. So when you carry out a massive population reduction, you're no doubt eliminating some of your best people. You're eliminating scientists, engineers, workers of all classes and types, and you're eliminating inventors, medical people, just everything, the whole gamut of different types of people. So when you insist upon population reduction, you're grinding away at your ability to be able to impose your will upon anybody else because you can't do it when you get rid of vital people that are necessary to your own survival, much less, the survival of a whole society and everything else. If you tear yourself down, somebody much, much more powerful than you, somebody much stronger than you, is eventually going to come in and invade you. It happens every time. It's been like that throughout world history. So this situation, the patterns are changing, for the pattern for 7 months now, having been this limited incursion, it's about to go full bore into a full-scale invasion. So you're going to have the limited incursion forces that are already there in the east, already doing the pinning action. They are the pinning action for the full-scale invasion, because while you have the regime in Kiev so laser-focused on fighting in the east and trying to capture territory there, they're leaving all their other sectors relatively undefended. I mean, not completely undefended, but you understand what I'm saying. They'll be so weak from pulling forces from those sectors to reinforce what they're doing in the east. And you understand as well as I understand. It's been 7 months. They have not been able to dislodge the Russians from the east. And the Russians have only did this tiny, limited incursion whereby they sent in this little force of 70 combat battalions to basically grind down at the Ukrainians. And that's exactly what they've done. And they've not been dislodged for 7 months. Now, all this time, the last known count, and it's been continuing, so it's well in excess over 4 million by now, but the last known count of artillery shells, of howitzer artillery ammunition fired by the Russians was at 3,600,000 plus shells, at an average of 20,000 shells a day. All the way back in March, April, and May, the mainstream media kept pushing the narrative that, Russia's running out of everything soon. They're running out of Nope. Wrong. Fail. Because they're still going and they're doing the same exact things that they've done since the start. All I'm doing is telling the truth about it. I'm just telling you what's been happening, and I'm telling you the truth about it. And the truth, for some reason, is highly censored because it's dangerous to the narrative. But when you're an independent thinker, you just want the truth. You're not out to support one side or the other side. You see the threats for exactly what the threats are. And Russia is a major threat to not be taken lightly. They are a dangerous enemy, not to be taken lightly. So are the Chinese. They're even more dangerous, and they haven't even done anything yet. Russia hasn't even begun to try yet. So why I report on those two as it relates to the topics I cover with warfare and warfare-related materials is because those two are the biggest threats by far. And the West, the elites of the West, have done everything in their power and their ability to poke and prod and instigate the easts of the elites, or the eastern elites, I'm sorry, the east of the elites, the eastern elites that run the east, rather, the eastern elites that run the east, that are in those regimes, because they control the issuance of their own currency, which means if the regimes control the issuance of the money there, unlike the Western system where the Western bankster classes run the regimes, the Eastern elites are in the regimes because the Eastern regimes control the issuance of their own currency. Case in point being China and Russia and India, North Korea and Iran, all controlling their own central banks, which means that the leaders of those regimes are their elites. So this is an East-West conflict. Like I've said long ago, I used to think that the entire notion of a Cold War between an East and a Western bloc, I used to think that that was the goofiest, silliest thing when I was growing up. I thought that, this couldn't possibly be, something that serious. But no, it actually is. The more I've discovered this, the more I've come to realize that the elites are not some unified world body. They're just a bunch of different people that are power hungry, that are greedy, that are out for their own interests, and they've only ever done business dealings together and cooperation when it suited their needs, because they're all trying to climb on each other's backs to the very, very top. They don't care about each other. They could care less about each other. They're only in it for themselves, each and every one of them. And it is an East-West conflict. And it is going to end up in a situation whereby you have things like in my audiobook occurring, where you have the West being dealt its final death knell at the hands of vengeful armies of Eastern nations, predominantly led by China, but also Russia, and all their smaller allies in tow with them. That is absolutely what will happen in the future. And the reason I warn about genuine threats is because I relate it all to the Bible and to prophecy, and it all 100% backs up every word of prophecy that's been said for those that want to deny it. Everything now that means that's happening in our physical world 100% backs up everything in the Word, and vice versa. It's a mutually supporting situation. So for me to constantly report on China and Russia means that you're learning about two of the biggest threats to the Western world. I mean, yes, the Western elites are a major threat themselves because they're eviscerating and tearing down their own power base, and that means that all the ordinary common people are going to suffer as a result of that. But that's not even all of it. See, people, they look at the left hand and completely ignore the right hand, when all I'm doing is informing people about what the right hand has been doing and what they're up to. In his speech, in the 5-hour speech at Valdai, Putin told the Western elites, he directed it specifically at them, he said that we will never be converted to your ways. He said that, you will never get rid of our traditions. You're not going to impose your wokeisms on us, essentially, for a lack of a better term to call it. He said it probably a lot more eloquently than I could, but I'm trying to relate this to ordinary people. So all his speeches lately have made it clear that there's two different power centers, and they're struggling against each other. And I'm talking about both the East and the West. They're both trying to basically outdo each other in the quest for world domination. And they've had to cooperate occasionally and had to make concessions to one another occasionally, but all the while, see, they're like two rival mafia families that they can sit down and have sit-downs and business dealings, but then they go to war the next minute, and they're constantly conspiring against each other and how to plunge that dagger into each other's backs. But the East, being masters at the long game, because they play the long game, they set themselves up way ahead of time for future scenarios. And I'm going to discuss some of that here in a bit. Sort of like the sanctions, how they boomeranged back against the West, and they did really nothing to Russia, because Russia not only stabilized, but they grew. They experienced economic growth. and financial growth, as evidenced by the value of the ruble to the dollar. The ruble dropped compared to the dollar, which means its value was steady going up. So, and that's for the first time ever. So, the same thing is going to happen when sanctions get done to the Chinese. It's going to hurt the United States exactly the same way as what happened to Russia has now put Europe in the deepest hole it could ever possibly be in. That is the exact same thing. You mark these words. That is exactly what will happen. That is going to put us under, not them, because they've already set themselves up for success by being the world's single biggest gold holding nation. They're the single biggest gold holder in the entire world, the CCP, China. By doing a petro and digi yuan, by having the Belt and Road for their trade needs, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all the initiatives and schemes that they've been up to for the past several decades has been setting up for the moment of their final parting ways with the West. That's what they've been doing. That's what they've been setting up for. Russia has already done this successfully because like Gonzalo Lira once said, I'll just put it this way, when they shot their whole load of the sanctions and they had nothing left after that, it did nothing to Russia but strengthen them. They came out of it better on the other end. So patterns, once again, patterns. Did we not learn from what just happened to Russia? So we're going to try the same thing with China, who has a massively bigger economy, 40% of the entire world's industrial and manufacturing base. So we really think that's going to work then with China? Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So that's another pattern that's going to lead to more failures and more trouble. So the speech. He indicated in his speech that everything is under control with the proxy, and it's quite evident at the fact that they've been doing this 300,000 man buildup for their future invasion. So they're going to invade through the north, from the Belgorod region of Russia, but also from southern Belarus. 300,000 troops and equipment is a massive force. It is a massive force. And need I remind people that out of the entire world, Russia has the second biggest tank fleet after China's, and I'm including storage and everything. They and China, they're about equal in artillery, and those two nations are the biggest artillery heavy nations. They're the biggest tank heavy nations. China has the biggest tank fleet, Russia with the second. They both have about the same amount of artillery, which they have enormous amounts of artillery. What else? Oh, yeah, the helicopters. Russia's the second biggest helicopter fleet on Earth after us. Now, that's one thing that we actually have more of than anybody, but that doesn't really matter when the enemies that you're fighting have counters for your helicopter fleet, because they put a lot of money and resources into developing some of the best air defense systems and networks in the entire world. They can SWAT down everything from drones to helicopters to high-flying aircraft all the way to satellites because of their anti-satellite weapon capabilities that are tried and true, proven, tested. That's who we're up against. They also have enormous swarms of mechanized infantry forces. Both China and Russia, but especially China. China has more armored vehicles just in general than any nation on Earth. Massively more. But Russia, being the second biggest fleet of ground vehicles as well as helicopters, they're in a very, very strong position to make war on people. And they have a ton of conventional resources to bring to bear. They don't have to rely on nukes. And why would they nuke a country that's literally like right next door to them? That would be really stupid. Be bad for their fields in southern Russia, don't people think? You know, I mean, they're not losing. They were never losing. The whole narrative around the use of nukes is under the supposition, the belief, and it's a false belief, but it was under the supposition that because Russia's losing and being backed into a corner, which they're not, but the narrative says that they're losing. You all really need to watch that narrative video I have in my community tab. That really explains it pretty well, actually. I definitely endorse that video. But under the supposition that Russia's losing is why they came out with that nuke narrative, which was really irresponsible because inadvertently, in saying such things, the person saying those things is indeed themselves the ones that are trying to provoke such a thing so that they can justify their losses, because we're the ones that are losing. The proxy that we have is losing. There's no path to victory for that proxy nation. They are not going to succeed. They can't win. And the West is running out of conventional resources, ammunition, and platforms, meaning the vehicles that use the weapons and ammo. They're running out of things to send that country. So many resources, so much money, so many lives, because all the mercs that have come from the West to go fight in that conflict for Ukraine, because they've lost so many of their young people. There's no path to victory at this point, because now they couldn't dislodge those Russians after 7 entire months of this thing. They could not dislodge that tiny force of Russians in the east. And now they're facing this massive threat from 300,000 additional forces coming down from the north in a massive sweep. It'll be a massive sweep from the western end of that nation all the way to the east, where Belgorod sits. They're gonna sweep all the way down into it. See, in Belgorod, they can attack from 2 different directions. They can go straight west into northern Ukraine, or they can strike south and sort of basically surround the entire east of the country, cut it off from the rest of the whole country. And if they strike in western Belarus, if they go south from their border in western Belarus, they can strike all the way to Lviv, and then they can also, of course, go into Odessa from Kherson. So they can really box them in multiple different ways. They can totally envelop that country. And 300,000 additional troops, in addition to the 63 to 65,000 troops that are sitting in the east right now, which is the 70 combat battalions. I'm going by average Russian battalion sizes, so it's about 63 to 65,000 troops that are in the east right now, helping the LPR and DPR proxy forces of their proxies. There's all in all going to be an enormous amount of forces once the main invasion happens. Once they actually go full scale and have a full scale invasion, you're going to have a massive force in that country. They will not be a sovereign nation. This will be a massive blow to NATO in an entire massive stream of failures. NATO's not going to get involved because if you believe in prophecy, it's way too early for us to be invaded. We haven't even collapsed, because that would be something that would get us invaded, believe it. Because even, Gonzalo Lira, he's not a military strategist, but he was right when he said that, look, if one of those divisions, like the 101st or whatever, the 101st goes to Romania, crosses the border between Romania to go try to shield Odessa from the Russians, they're all going to get annihilated, and he's right about that. One little airborne division ain't shit against 300,000 heavy invasion forces coming in with a fleet of armor, mechanized infantry, heavy artillery, helicopter gunships, air support. One airborne division is not enough. Then, of course, in the Black Sea, you got the whole Russian Black Sea fleet to provide support from the sea. Naval support, gunnery support, missile support, firing cruise missiles. They've been firing a lot of cruise missiles from their ships. They've been pounding the shore, like how they basically pounded Snake Island into surrendering. And Snake Island's not even really, it has really no strategic value at this point, but, they pounded their little garrison into surrendering, and that was one of those fake narratives they made up that Snake Island, said, F you, Russian gunship. But, no, that was a narrative. Same with the Ghost of Kiev. That was all bullshit. Those Duran guys, they really ripped into those narratives in one of their shows once, and it was pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, I have no skin in that game, nonetheless. But I look at it for the value it has as a military encounter, as a sort of teaching tool where you can learn about how these different strategies are being actively employed in an active war zone. So the Russians, mainly fighting in artillery and missile conflict so far, sitting in the east and using a heavy amount of artillery and also missiles, they've basically been conducting more or less static operations up to this point, except for at the very beginning when they did their feint attacks. There's little instances of mobile warfare here and there where they might cede a little bit of ground, let the Ukrainians move in, but then they'll shell the shit out of them and they'll move right back in and take the ground. That's what's been going on for the past 7 months. So this conflict is nearing its end, and for anyone to support this conflict on either side, and I mean that, for anyone to either support the Russians by wanting to go and fight for them, or anyone supporting the Ukrainians by wanting to go and fight for them, you are volunteering yourself to be a pawn for either the Eastern or the Western elites. Nobody should be supporting this conflict, as far as the actual conflict itself and what it represents. It is a proxy war between the East and the West. Anybody who supports either of the sides by volunteering themselves to go and fight is wrong, and they have no business there. The West has no business there. We never should have gotten involved in that whole situation from day one, because the Minsk Accords had been violated, because according to the Minsk Accords, of which 2 NATO nations, France and Germany, were signatories of, along with Ukraine and Russia, NATO was to never expand into Ukraine. And because NATO got involved trying to train troops there and support them in their war that they've had for the last 8 years, going against the LPR and DPR, that officially got the West involved. And then it just kept going, and it spiraled out of control to where now you had, the whole thing's bad, cats. Nobody should be involved in that. That shouldn't even be happening. The West never should have gotten involved. If we hadn't have gotten involved, then that whole thing might not have even happened. I don't even think the Russians would have invaded if everybody upheld the Minsk agreements, the Minsk Accords. The Minsk Accords was the peace treaty whereby Ukraine was not supposed to join NATO, but Russia would stay out of Ukraine. Russia wouldn't go into Ukraine. But when NATO started getting involved in Ukraine, then they invaded Ukraine. So we started sending all this stuff over there and making it worse when we should have just left it all alone. It was a limited incursion, and now it's at the point where they're going to steamroll that whole country. And I feel bad for the Ukrainian people, because their leadership is extremely corrupt. I mean, the Ukraine regime is a horrible regime, but so are the Russians. They're a big threat. Russia is a major threat. That's why I report on them and China, because Russia and China will both invade the United States, and they will invade the rest of Europe, because everything that these Western elites are doing to provoke either of them and both of them is setting the stage for them to have the casus belli that they need, meaning the causes to go to war, so that their people will get behind them when they do it. They're giving them all the reasons they need to go to war. But yeah, cats, I feel horrible for the Ukrainian people. I do. I feel bad for them. My heart goes out to them. But the leaders of all these countries are all evil. They're all evil. And they're having a proxy war in that country to decide the future of the world, basically, because it will decide the future of the world, because NATO, it'll be such a big hammer blow once the Russians take over Ukraine and make it part of Russia, because they will. That's exactly what they're planning on doing. Once they take over Ukraine and it's no longer a sovereign nation, they're going to basically drive a massive wedge between NATO, and NATO will begin to fall apart. It's already starting to happen. It's already been starting to happen with countries like Turkey or Canada. Turkey is being slowly wooed over into the Eurasian bloc by Russia, and Canada has been, well, like I said in my last live, Canada has had some massive dirt held right over the head of its leadership because they have massive blackmail material in order that Chinese troops have been able to build up there for so long and march in uniform, do PT road marches out in public on Salt Spring Island and other places, fly their fighter aircraft over London, Ontario, where they train regularly. I mean, that for Canada to be in such a catch-22 where they have to play the game with NATO and with China, there must be some massive dirt being held over the head of their leadership. And they're also being forced to stay into power so that China can keep making their moves with Canada as a willing dupe, as a willing participant in the future invasion of the United States, where the external troops are going to come down and basically sweep our country. Same thing with Mexico. They're going to come up and invade from Mexico, too. They're going to beach land. They're going to parachute in. Just like in my audiobook. It'll be exactly like in my audiobook. Exactly like that. The conditions on the ground, everything. So, we're going to be facing some hard times. We're going to be facing a lot of challenges. And the whole situation with Ukraine is really, it's almost over. They're going to put an end to it. It's, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, their leaders have brought them into something that they shouldn't have ever had to suffer, but they should have just continued agreeing to the Minsk Accords. But, that was Russia's casus belli, their reasons of why they went in there, because they were going in there because of the Minsk Accords being violated by NATO. So the whole thing is a mess. The whole conflict is a mess, and it's a shame that so many people have had their lives ruined in such a conflict. But the truth of it is that Russia is building up a massive invasion force in Belarus and in Belgorod, and they're going to invade and they're going to bring that to an end. And like I said, I estimate that that's going to be sometime within the next 2 to 4 weeks, maybe a little longer, but I don't see them giving the West very much time to make up its mind if it's going to do a false flag attack or not. But then that takes me back to the American nuclear stance being changed. Now, first things first, for them to change the stance to consider using nukes against conventional forces means that they feel backed into a corner because of how badly things are going in Ukraine. And they have to keep lying and coming up with narratives to explain away why Russia is still there, still doing the same exact things that they've done since the start. And they also are going to have to come up with a way to distract people once things finally end and NATO begins falling apart. They're going to try and hope that people forget about such a massive loss because of all the investment of military hardware and money and lives that went into that whole conflict for it to be such a massive loss. It'll be worse than when NATO retreated from Afghanistan. It'll be much worse than that. This thing would be NATO's undoing. Like Jens Stoltenberg said, he said that this would be such a massive blow to NATO if the whole Ukraine thing doesn't end there. In their favor. So that, it is what it is at this point. I mean, it's already basically set in stone, and we're just waiting for it at this point to actually kick off. Now, with the whole situation with China and the sanctions, they're really, really prodding and poking at China, and China, their CCP regime leadership has gotten together, and they vowed to make war with Taiwan now an official national policy, whereas before their policy was to pursue a peaceful reunification. Now they're changing it to a war stance. They're going to pursue a reunification through warfare. And I see the entire sanctions that the West is trying to now impose on China as ending equally horribly as the ones that were tried to be imposed on Russia had been for Western Europe. Only this is going to hurt America massively because of all the products and everything we depend on for China. It's going to put an end to all of that if they do the same type of sanctions package on China that has been done to Russia. It'll hurt America like what the Russian sanctions hurt Western Europe. this is going to be a really, really rough time ahead. And we're already teetering on the brink of collapse. I mean, we're running low on fuel. I've been telling people that since August, and lo and behold, now you're seeing all these more mainstream YouTube channels coming out with, oh, our diesel situation is in a crisis, or oh, this fuel situation's in a crisis for the whole East Coast, and so on and so forth. Well, I told you all back in August that we would be in a food and fuel crisis by then, and here we are. We are in a food and fuel crisis. The food situation, equally bad, equally bad. You're seeing a lot of information come out about that too. So, I'm not saying I was vindicated or anything like that, but all I'm saying is that, my estimates with the available information I had at the time seemed to be coming to pass, and they already did come to pass, because at the end of August, you already heard that the fuel situation for the strategic reserve was dangerously low. I mean, so look at us now. I mean, this is going to be a really, really massively harsh winter for Western Europe and North America, because a total divorce from both China and Russia, and also the Eurasian bloc, is going to basically be the final separation between East and West. And after that, things will only get worse, because you got to understand, the entire West as a bloc does not have the manufacturing base that the East has. It doesn't have the resources that the East has. It's like committing economic suicide to totally part ways with nations that once supplied the vast majority of the energy resources and finished and components of products, like China in their case, and Russia with the energy resources. It's setting us up to have a total collapse. I mean a total final, like USSR style collapse, where everything just goes completely under, like all at one time. Like I said, this winter you're not going to have the choices that you once had when it comes to products. You're going to see a lot of window dressing, because in a lot of areas they're going to front up all the items that they have up to the front of the shelves. There's not going to be very much behind them, if anything at all. They're going to continue using those painted flaps with the painted cans on them that they'll use to disguise other areas of shelving. They're going to space out the shelves more. You're going to see it. You will see that. This is going to be a very difficult winter. And the fuel situation, yeah, that's gonna prevent a lot of transit of goods to places. That's why you're going to see the food situation become pretty much as bad as what I'm talking about, because it's already pretty bad like that in many places, but places that hadn't quite experienced the magnitude of the impact of this yet, they will. They will. By wintertime, they absolutely will. And now that the news about the fuel's coming out, there's going to be less trains and less trucks on the road than ever. So that means there's going to be less goods getting delivered than ever. A lot of crops have to be destroyed because they can't even make it. They can't even make it to market to where they can actually be taken and turned into foodstuffs of different types, or where they can, be sold as is if it's like produce or whatever else, or made into preserves or whatever you do with the different food products, foodstuffs. That's we've already had a really horrible harvest this year, and because we're already eating off of last year's bumper crop, next year things are going to be really awful, really awful. I don't see Western Europe making it out the other end of winter in a really good condition. I really do. I think it's going to be really terrible over there for those people, and I really, I feel bad for them. But, the West, just the whole West in general, even the United States, we're going to feel it too. We are not getting away with nothing over here. We're going to feel all of it, because, like Putin actually said in his speech, globalism has failed the West, and we're going to see it. Like I said in my live stream that I wish everybody would watch, it's called The Boomeranging Effects of Globalism. That's a good one to watch. Well, it's all boomeranging back at us. Globalism is what developed our enemies while at our expense, like China. Globalism is what turned China into the world superpower, the world hegemon, who has 40% of the whole world's industrial base in just their country. 40%. It's why they're the leader in all these major dual-use technologies, and by dual use, I mean dual military and civilian use technologies, It's why China is now the world leader in so many technologies, be it artificial intelligence, be it robotics, be it hypersonics, be it lasers of different types, directed energy, electronic warfare, all these different classes of weapons that China has at their disposal. It's truly it just doesn't bode well. And for us to be doing all these provocations against them, it doesn't bode well for us at all. It bodes the future for us to where you have an exact situation like my audiobook coming together, just like my audiobook. Now, speaking of, I put up 2 very long parts. I put up, well, actually it was 3 parts, but in 2 videos. The newest one is the continuation of the 2 characters that are in the battle at the Cap at DC. There's an enemy character, but then there's an American character, and then the one before that is the depiction of events that happened in Michigan, and also the other one was on the state line area of Montana and Idaho. Now, I try to show different aspects of what was going on around the country, because when we get invaded, they knock our satellites out of the air, so we get our eyes and ears gouged out. They cyber attack the grid, shut all the grid and telecom off, so there's no running water, no electricity, no telecommunications. They use electronic warfare to interfere with any basically redundancies, backup communications. So they have their electronic warfare units already embedded in their CCP properties who erect their antennas and jam everything. They've already hacked solar winds. So it really doesn't matter what our nuclear policy is. If they try to do a first strike one because they're feeling intimidated because they know Russia's about to win in Ukraine, it doesn't matter what our policy is. They can jam all our nuclear weapons, and plus they all have to work anyway for it to be an effective policy. A lot of our nukes haven't been overhauled yet. They have to send all sorts of nuclear weapons through that Pantex plant in Texas to get them redone and recertify them, because a lot of them are over the age of 40. Because when they're over the age of 40, it's not a guarantee that they'll even all work. Yeah, they've made some progress. They've revamped some of the old arsenal, but there's still so many that have to go through there, and it costs an immense amount of money and time to basically reestablish your nuclear arsenal as a first-rate nuclear arsenal. We don't even have a working hypersonic in rapid deployment at this stage. We haven't even rapidly deployed or manufactured any type of hypersonic weapon. They're still in the testing phase where they're working on one. They haven't even rapidly manufactured or started deploying any yet. So we don't even have a single working design yet. And our enemies are on their, in some cases, 5th designs by now. So we're way behind in a lot of different areas, and it's definitely going to affect us. And meanwhile, we're wasting money on a proxy conflict that we shouldn't be involved in. We're basically wasting money on trying to make hybrid armored vehicles and other stupid green projects for the military. It's just cats. It is wrong though, because that war shouldn't be going on. Those people shouldn't have to suffer like that. Those people shouldn't be suffering like that. If NATO hadn't gotten involved there, I don't think Russia would have really invaded them, because the whole reason why Russia went in is because of the Minsk Accords, because Zelensky invited NATO in. So, but I don't think he had a choice though either. I think he was put in power. I think somebody put him. I don't think he was acting on his own there. But it's just a mess. The whole situation's a mess. The ordinary people of Ukraine are suffering because corrupt leaders wanted to play their corrupt, stupid geopolitical chess games. And, that's what I'm saying. Those things shouldn't happen, because it's always the ordinary people that suffer the most. And ordinary people shouldn't have to deal with that type of thing. You shouldn't have to have a war tearing up your country, like how it's depicted in my audiobook. I've been to war. I've been to Iraq. We never should have gone really in there. We hurt a lot of people that shouldn't have been hurt. War is terrible. War is terrible for everybody. War is even terrible for those who fight it, because you end up going home and you reflect on some things that happened, and it damages you. It damages you. Some things, you wish hadn't actually happened that did happen. And, it's hard. I don't want to get all thinking about it on while I'm doing this live, so I'm gonna leave that alone for now. But look, I don't think that should even be happening. But I, as a soldier with my military mind, I'm fascinated by the strategy, the tactics, and the actual warfare itself. But at the same time, I do feel bad for the people that are caught in the middle of it that shouldn't be involved in it, like the ordinary people. The ordinary civilians shouldn't have to be experiencing that type of thing in their own neighborhoods and towns, I mean, but as far as like the fighting, the actual battle between the opposing armies, I find the military parts fascinating, but the leadership that sent them to do it is corrupt and never should have initiated that in the first place. But since it's happening and there's nothing anybody can do about it, then I'm going to learn. I'm going to use it as an opportunity to learn and learn about the current strategies, tactics, doctrines, and things being used in the conflict between the two different sides. But the whole situation, Russia is reviving itself. The Bible warned us that the nations to the north of Babylon, which is Russia, China, and all their allies, they're going to be the big threat in the end times. And that's why I warn about what I warn about on this channel. And right now, China and Russia, they're already ready to go. They've already got the military muscle. Especially China. The Pentagon has lost every single solitary war simulation to China since 2017, 2018. Around that time frame was when we started to lose every single solitary war simulation with China on the Pentagon's own supercomputers, which that definitely means something. You also then have, the NATO war games, all of NATO. NATO's not ready to fight a war itself. And NATO is in no position to fight a war because in the NATO exercises, as I've explained before, not only are the NATO militaries puny and not properly maintained with their equipment, they don't fix up and maintain their equipment, like especially Germany is notorious for that right now. But you also have it to where they don't have the munitions. They don't have the munitions dumps to be able to fight even a defensive war, much less any sort of, offensive action, because, Germany is in the worst shape. Out of all the four biggest European NATO contributors, Germany is in the worst shape. But then you also have Italy, France, and Britain, and they're not much better. Britain and France expend their entire stockpiles of howitzer shells in no more than 8 days. A week and a day is all it takes for them to completely exhaust their national stockpiles of howitzer ammunition. That's just France and Germany, not Germany, France and Britain. Germany and Italy probably have even less. So it probably wouldn't take all four of them very long. I've already read the amounts of equipment that each nation has many, many multiple times on my lives. None of them have anywhere near as many military vehicles and ammunition as Russia. Not even close. Not even close. And we don't have enough forces within Europe itself to be able to do much of anything to stop Russia. If they were to go full bore on Western Europe, they'd be at the English Channel before we'd even be able to do anything sizable to try to impact the situation, even though we really can't because of the current state that our military's in. Our military is in shambles right now. It's in shambles. The old army that I was part of, man, it's like night and day compared to this woke military we have now. It's a joke. Our current armed forces is a joke compared to what it was just 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were top of the line. I mean, we were professional. We did our job. We did it well. We did what we were asked to do. And there was none of this stuff going on that's going on now. I mean, we were a real bona fide professional military. And now, we were world class. We were a world class fighting force. And now it's just a total joke. It's total shambles right now. Total shambles. We couldn't beat anybody in a war. We would lose horribly. And we don't have anywhere near the amounts of munitions that Russia has, and especially China. We can't even keep up with them in the manufacturing of anything because China especially has the most major factories when it comes to their military industrial complex. When it comes to massive factory complexes, China has more than any other nation on earth at over 500 major factory complexes, like the size of the Lima, Ohio tank factory, or maybe the old Caterpillar factory that used to be in York, Pennsylvania. These ginormous complexes that are just belching out all kinds of smoke nonstop. They're huge. They have these massive assembly lines, production lines. And that's just not only for tanks and APCs and IFVs or aircraft, it's also for munitions and, all sorts of things, rifles, mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, anti-tank missiles, cruise missiles, all of it, the whole nine, tactical ballistic missiles, hypersonics. They have assembly lines for all kinds of things, and they have massive amounts of them. And they have massive amounts of vehicles, huge amounts of vehicles. Yes, cats. It's sad. It's very sad for those people. No, but I don't think, I don't take sides in the whole thing because Ukraine isn't my country and Russia's not my country. But what I do is I look at the situation and I evaluate it based on what I see. And it's really a horrible situation. And it's a bad situation for the people that live there. They're under some really bad leaders. So are the Russians. I mean, the whole thing's bad and the whole thing shouldn't have happened. And the reason why I say that the Russians have bad leaders is because the leader of Russia and the leader of China, they want to take over the United States. They do. They want to take over. Wei Fang is the Chi-Com defense minister. He not only said that he wants to take over and colonize the United States, but Wei Fang in China said that he wants to exterminate the American people, like a modern day type of a Holocaust. That guy is like the Heinrich Himmler of the Eastern world. Like they want to take over the United States and exterminate the American people and replace them with Chinese. That's what Wei Fang said. And they can do it because they have the power to do it. They're ready. They've been building up for so long. That's why China and Russia are so dangerous, especially China, but Russia's also dangerous too. They're dangerous. People shouldn't underestimate them because they're both very powerful, especially China. And China, they will take us over. They will take us over. I've had dreams about it, very realistic dreams of fighting Chinese troops on American soil. I've had dreams about that. I've had dreams of certain cities of ours being hit with nukes. I mean, it wasn't everywhere. Like, we didn't get blanketed by nukes, but certain cities of ours did get nuked. I mean, I've had those, and they were very real, too. One of the nuke dreams I had, I was basically exterminated right in downtown Dallas when it went off. I was incinerated, exterminated, right on the spot, gone. That was the most horrifying dream that I've ever woke up from in my life. Then the other dreams I had about it, I was further off, and I was watching it. See, that dream had personal meaning to me because back then, you see, I wasn't living right. Like, I was doing a lot of things I shouldn't have been doing. I lived in the city. I was doing bad shit down there I shouldn't have been doing. And I think God was telling me, in the future, if you keep living like this and you stay living in the city, you're going to get incinerated when the Chinese and Russians invade. And then, because the other dreams ended differently. They had different endings. And the other endings, I lived. I wasn't there. So those dreams told me a lot. And I posted those dreams when I started the channel because originally, before this became a information channel, a research and information type of channel, before all of that, it sort of evolved. It started off as a dream channel because all my original intent for this channel was to do nothing but post my dreams and then just leave it at that. But then something told me I had to keep going. So it was like, God told me. I felt like, it's just that feeling you get, it's a good feeling, it's from God, it's like, I got told to keep up with the channel, keep making videos. So then it turned into sort of like a current events thing, but then I stopped covering current events because of all the narratives. There was so many narratives, I had to stop covering it. So then I just turned it into a raw research channel where I took all my research and I made entire hypothetical scenarios and stories and everything about foreign invasion, but also the civil conflict that's coming. Two different timelines, by the way. You see, now the civil conflict happens when it happens on its own timeline, which will be the real timeline according to prophecy based on what Jeremiah 50 and 51 says. Before we even get invaded, it says that conflict or violence, depending on what translation of the Bible you read, says conflict or violence will break out between multiple leaders, like faction leaders within Babylon. And then we get invaded. And it emphasizes the fact multiple times that we're invaded by massive, humongous armies that come in from all sides and from inside, because it says all sides. It didn't just say just from the north or just from the beaches or just from the south or just from the beaches and the south or the north. No, it said all sides, inside and out and all the way around. This is going to be a massive invasion, fourth generation warfare, hybrid warfare. So yes, that's, my channel then turned into a research and information channel and analysis channel where I analyze and put together information to help people see a much bigger picture, a more balanced picture, because I look through the narratives and I kick a lot of narratives in the ass. Like I totally kick the narratives in the ass, and I use raw numbers and facts, figures, data points, just various types of information I have. I use all the information to find out what's a narrative and what's not, so that I can ascertain accurately exactly what's going on and why, and what was really said and what's really happening versus what the narrative says is happening. And that is how I discover if something is a load of BS, or if something actually has merit, or if something is something else entirely. And that's why I look at the other side a lot. I try to understand the other side, because I see a lot of clueless people talking about Russia and China, but they don't know the first things about them. They've never studied See, if you want to know about your enemy, you have to study your enemy. You have to know your enemy. You can't look at your enemy in the way that you think they are. You have to look at them as they are, how they are, why they are, what their motivation is, why they even do what they do. You have to understand why they're doing what they do. You have to understand what motivates them. You have to understand how they think, how they act, what their behavior is, their patterns. Speaking of the title of this, their patterns are very important. Everything about your enemy, if you want to understand your enemy, you have to get into your enemy's head. You have to learn how they think, why they do what they do. Now, don't get me wrong. The East and the West, I personally, as just as a man, I hold no allegiances, because I know that all the leaders around the world, all these elites, whether they're Eastern or Western, they're evil. And anytime you get involved in their games, if you're going to play their games, then you've endorsed them and their behavior, their destructive, vile, evil behavior. Anytime you play their games, you endorse them. And I'm guilty of it, because I went to Iraq. I didn't know any better. I didn't know that whole thing, I was young. I mean, there's parts about it that were good. There were parts about it that were terrible. I mean, war is different. It's a mix of different experiences. It's never all just bad. It's never all just good. It's never all just mundane. It's like a mix of different things. There's things you even learn while you're over there. You learn about a lot of things. I got to see ancient history in Iraq. I got to touch ancient things. Like I got to touch one of the tombs of Nimrud, where they allegedly buried some of his limbs because he was hacked into pieces and buried in different places. It was like a birthday cake looking tomb. It was guarded by local Iraqi puppet forces, and I got to touch it. It had key uniform writing on it and everything. I probably shouldn't have touched it. It's probably cursed, for all I know, the damn thing. But, I got to see ancient Roman monasteries from the Byzantine time period in the north of Iraq. I got to see all kinds of things. I mean, there's a lot of different things there that, I love history, so it was very educational in that regard. But, and I enjoyed the camaraderie with my, fellow friends and soldiers, that I went with. But, there were horrible, awful things that happened there too that I really try to forget, And, it was traumatizing to me personally, because I didn't think that, I could even do certain things that I did. You don't think you're capable of certain things, but then, it's like a whole mind F on you. It's a total mind F. I'm not going to curse, but I think people understand what I'm saying. I hope they understand what I'm saying. It's like, you don't think that you're capable of certain things, and then you do certain things, and then you're like, wow, I can't believe that I did that, good and bad, but mostly on the bad end of things, you're like, wow, and by good, I mean getting your own ass out of a situation that you probably should have died in, but the bad being the things that you've done to others that you wish you hadn't done. But, yeah, Iraq was something else. It was a life-changing experience, and that's like the understatement of the year. But it changed everything about who I am. It changed everything about me. But I understand war. I know what it is. I know what it is to fight. I know what it is to see death and gore and everything else. I know all that. I understand what all that is. It's why I put it in my stories. Because I can relive some of it through my writing, and it's kind of therapeutic for me in a way, because it's not good to hold everything in. Sometimes you can let aspects of it out by putting details in your stories that came from your own experiences, but you're doing it for the right reason, because you're doing it to educate other people about what these things are really like versus the fantasies and the misconceptions that people have, about war. Because war is nothing like, see, people in the West are very coddled. They're very immature in some aspects, and they don't know anything about war unless they've been there, done that. And that's a very small portion of the overall Western society as a whole, as the whole collective West. Very few of its people have experienced war or anything like it, or any sort of hardships even close to it, like third world living or war. I mean, most people in the West are coddled and spoiled, and they have all these things, and they don't understand that they're living in a Disney World existence. It's all fake. It's artificial. The real world, real life is like the third world, and war is real life. It's like live or die every day. You're either going to make it or you're not. And when it happens in Western nations, when we get invaded, that's when people are going to find out who they really are, because all the mundane is going to disappear. All the mundane, all the boring, simple things of convenient living, they're all going to disappear. And people are going to find out if they have grit, or if they have what it takes to make it or not. People are going to find out who they really are, because they're going to be faced with challenges that they never imagined. And they're going to find out if they're tough enough or they're not to be able to make it, to be able to weather through it, And that's just the reality. And that's why I try to convey, aspects of that very thing in my stories, because I try to show people so many different angles of what type of experiences would be typical for a situation like that. Different angles, different areas, different places, different points of view. I even put an enemy point of view in the thing, because I like it to be a well-rounded, well-balanced masterpiece where people can understand every side of it involved in such a thing, in such an undertaking. Because at the end of the day, your enemies are still human too. Your enemies are still people too. They just serve a different cause. They just have different beliefs. Their beliefs might even be evil, but they're still human. And you have to portray it that way, because that's accurate. That's an accurate portrayal. I mean, even when you watch old World War II movies, I mean, even the Germans were human. I mean, they were human. They had their own ideas. They had their own beliefs. They had their own everything. And, a lot of it was misguided and a lot of it was wrong, but you still had humanity come out every so often in those people. I mean, they weren't all bad people. They served a bad regime and they served a bad leader, but the people themselves were not all bad people. You have to show different sides of things, because you can't have everything be all one-sided, or else then you end up with a narrative. You have to be neutral. I'm all about neutrality. I am all about being unbiased and not taking sides when it comes to things that go on in the world. And the reason for that is because I know at the end of the day that all of these events are being orchestrated by puppet masters. I'm talking about everything. All the wars, all the suffering. It's all being orchestrated by puppet masters. And you have two options. You can either choose to play the game and be part of it, or you can choose to separate yourself from it. Like what the word says when it comes to Babylon: come out of her, my people. Come out of her, my people. Be that you not partake in her plagues. Meaning that, you can either be a partaker or you can separate yourself from it. Meaning you can step out of that whole idea that you were raised in, that you were brought up in, that you grew up in, about this idea of just nations and leaders and governments. And you can take a step out of that and be like, no, you know what? I'm not going to play the game. I'm not going to take anybody's side. I'm going to be on my own side. I'm going to be neutral. I'm going to look out for the people I love. I'm going to take care of myself. And I'm not going to play the games of some elite banksters in the West, or some evil Eastern regimes like the CCP or the Russians or the whoever else. You don't have to play their games. You don't have to be in no East-West war. You can just be neutral. I mean, that's what I'm saying. People often choose sides. They want to pick a side when it comes to worldly things, but we're not to be of the world. We're in the world, but we're not to be worldly, meaning we're not supposed to hold on to worldly things, like worldly ideas, like politics, which is a fake construct anyway. It's a construct of the imagination. Politics is as fake as WWF. So it's like when you get involved in something like that, you're involved in a fake mental construct. You're involved in a whole fake system. It's a system of control created by the Western elites. The Western globalists created politics. It traces its origin way back. Then you have the Eastern elites where, you could get, if you lived in China, then you're going to grow up under the CCP and you're going to be brainwashed. You're going to be brainwashed to serve the CCP. Or in Russia, so on and so forth. It's all the same thing. Where depending on where you grow up is what you get inducted into. Now, you can separate yourself from all of it by being neutral and taking a step out of it, stepping both legs back and being like, you know what? I'm not going to partake in any of these worldly systems. I'm not going to be a partaker in any of this worldly stuff. I'm just going to be an observer. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to study it. I'm going to learn about it because God said that my people perish for a lack of what? A lack of what? A lack of knowledge. Knowledge. So how do you gain knowledge? Well, knowledge comes from God, but you could take a step back. You could take a step back and you can be an observer. You can be neutral. You can be unbiased. You can look at everything through unbiased glasses. You can look at everything without a bias. You don't have to pick sides in anything when it comes to worldly things. The only side you should pick is God's side. You should be on God's side and not on any side of any man-made anything. You know what I'm saying? I hope people understand what I'm saying. The only side we need to be on is the side of what's right and what's godly. We need to serve God. We don't, the Most High. We don't, Yeshua Messiah. We don't need to serve any of man's systems. That's all. It's all, anything that's of man, we shouldn't be partakers of. That's also how you stay out of a lot of unnecessary trouble when it comes to life in general. Just stay away from things that are not of God, things that are worldly. Stay away from them. But learn about them. Because the ignorance is what gets people wiped out. Because people that don't learn, people that refuse to learn, people that refuse to study their enemies, those are the people that are ignorant of their enemies. And those are the people that can become manipulated or just being complacent sheep that end up getting butchered. You don't want to be somebody like that, because that's why it goes back to the whole word telling us that my people perish for a lack of knowledge. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a prophet, I'm not a watchman, I'm none of that. I'm just a researcher, a record keeper, and I'm keeping records of events by taking a neutral stance when I look at different events to report the facts. And whatever the facts are favoring when it comes to certain things, like if the facts are overwhelmingly on whatever, for whatever reason, then I have to at least tell the truth. I have to report that. But I'm not picking sides just because I speak the truth about something being the way it is. I'm just looking at things objectively. I'm learning about my enemies, those who want to destroy me, and I'm trying to put myself in their mind to understand what makes them tick and why they do the things they do. When you can do that, you're a better person for it, because you learn more that way. And the more you learn, knowledge is power. The more it gives you the ability to control your life a lot better than you would otherwise. Take for instance, those of you who learn from my scenarios, my hypothetical warfare scenarios. I depict it through the eyes of characters at the street level, showing you how they do things to survive it or get through it somehow. I show you what works, what doesn't, and why in those situations. I also convey it over a map. I show how these enemies do things on a map, how they move around by units on a map level view of a different area. Those are things that can be learned from, because when we do get invaded, you'll be a lot wiser. You'll be a lot more wiser. You'll be a lot more wise than people who don't know anything at all about how armies work or do things. You, on the other hand, you could be a leader of people if you were leading a survival group, because you're already going to be able to anticipate the types of things that'll be happening, because you would have learned something from all those hypotheticals about how to survive in such a situation. You know, that's the whole point of why I do that, because the Chinese and Russians are going to invade us, and people are going to need to know how that's generally going to work and why, and what they can do to try to survive it. You're going to be doing a lot of movement. You're going to be doing a lot of digging, a lot of hiding, and a lot of more movement, because you're going to keep moving, because if you stay in any one spot too long, that is how you're going to be gotten. It's how it always goes. So I thank everybody for joining me this Friday. Sort of went off on a tangent there toward the end, but there's a lot of things going on. So always beware of different narratives that are going on, and be careful not to believe anything that you hear. Take everything with a pinch of salt. The best thing you can do is learn facts and figures, because that is what helps you to be able to discern a lot better about what you're hearing, whether something's somewhat honest or not honest at all, or nowhere even on the board of honesty, you know. So, you know, you learn by using numbers and raw facts and figures, and that's how you're able to see through different narratives and see them for what they are. That's how I do it. So I'm going to greet everybody in chat, and I'm going to make my way off. Tried to trip up the algos by going on a little early, but I see I don't have very many in the chat or very many likes. Let's see here. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Hitting buttons. Okay. Well, good, cats. Yeah, I got my cats with me too. I got 3 cats. I got Romero and May. Those are my old twins. My twin tiger-looking cats. They're like gray tigers. And then I have Porky. Porky's my Russian blue. He's always getting into trouble. He's the young one. My other 2 are really old. They're like 15 or 16. Well, yeah, Miguel, if they'd have stayed neutral, I don't think that they would have gotten invaded. I think they'd be at peace right now if they didn't violate the Minsk agreements. But it's not the Ukrainian people's fault. It's their leaders' fault. Yeah, Shadow Mask. It's all just bread and circuses. Yes, unorthodox. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Miguel, I don't think that's true. I don't think we have any there, unless they're like, you know, spec ops that are like in plain clothes or dressed up like the Ukrainians. They don't want to provoke. I mean, we have advisors. We've always had advisors there, but I don't think that we would actually send in like whole combat units. That would get them decimated, and then it would drag us into a war that we wouldn't be able to win. Like I said in my last one, that would be very dangerous for us to get involved. I mean, like full-fledged involved, where we've got uniformed units on the ground there. That would get us invaded, because all of the Trojans that the Chinese and Russians have set up, you could expect our satellites to be swat down. You can expect the hacking to happen. They would hack our nuclear weapons and shut them off, because Chinese have already hacked solar winds, and they've got all the crown jewels. They've got everything. They've got everything. They have the best cyber warfare program on Earth. Chinese do. Russia's has a good one, but the Chinese have the best cyber warfare. Hey, Kathy, great to see you. Well, yes, it's a good thing it's Friday. Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, Miguel, I think they're in neighboring countries still. I think they're in Poland and Romania. I don't see them going into Ukraine proper unless they're like in Ukrainian uniforms or something. You know, they'd have to do it in some sort of unofficial way to where they wouldn't provoke us getting, you know, attacked for it. You know, that would probably get us invaded, because, like Gonzalo Lira said, if they tried something like that, not only would it get our whole division wiped out if they tried to send in the 101st. Because that's a light unit. That's an airborne unit. They're not made to take on these big, massive, heavy invasion forces that would outnumber them by like a factor of what's a division's like 12 to 16,000. So 12 to 16,000 against 300,000. I mean, those are horrible odds. And then they're going up against a whole bunch of heavy units. They wouldn't last very long. Oh, and they're woke too. They're this new generation of wokesters. So they wouldn't know how to fight. They'd be holding up stress cards saying that the fighting's too stressful. Got snowflakes in the foxholes. So, yeah, it would be a bad situation for us. I really hope that doesn't happen. But I don't see it happening again because Bible prophecy, hasn't so much of it hasn't happened just yet. So I don't see it be. I think that's too close. It's too close. Right now, what's going to happen is, like I said in my last live and this live, Ukraine's going to get taken over by Russia. They're probably going to be brought back into the old Russian Empire or the new Soviet Union, whatever they're going to call it, and it's going to break apart NATO because it's going to be such a hammer blow to NATO for investing all that they invested in that black hole of a proxy, and they're going to lose all the money and weapons they've already lost. It'll be such a huge loss to the capabilities of NATO because they've given away so much of their hardware and money. It would be a massive blow. It would be a blow that NATO would never respond or get back up from. It's just the situation is basically over for that. But yeah, it's just a matter of weeks now, and until whatever is going to happen is going to happen. As far as them doing their full-scale invasion, it's just a matter of weeks away. So, well, thank you all for coming. I'm glad you all came. I really enjoyed having everybody. Hey, Priscilla. Yeah, thank you too, Priscilla, and Sylvia, Hannah, and Cats, and I'm glad your cats are doing good. Cats. My cat's doing good too. All right, and Shadow Mask and everybody. You all have a blessed day.